The nation's first major vote on a state abortion law since Roe was overturned in June. I'm Alan Holdren in Kansas at an election watch event. That story ahead.
A promising night turns devastating for pro-life hopes in Kansas. Our report, a snapshot of Election Day, plus analysis from Kansas Catholics on where the fight goes next to save the unborn.
It is a blessing to receive and host you among us.
Pope Francis goes to Canada to seek forgiveness for the wrongs of the past, as the church acknowledges harm caused to Indigenous people there.
When the kids have questions, they can ask you.
And the joys of being a grandparent. We celebrate the wisdom of our elders and how they inspire faith in the young. EWTN News In Depth starts now. The agony.
I do hope that there's some lessons that we've learned here in Kansas that I think could help other states.
A vote no against the amendment means that the abortion industry goes without any guardrails here in Kansas.
And the ecstasy.
They voted no on changing the Constitution and really, demonstrated our free state roots here in Kansas are alive and well.
Abortion, one of our country's most divisive issues, goes to the voters. The outcome? A warning that the pro-life movement still has much work to do to save the unborn. Welcome to EWTN News In Depth. All eyes were on Kansas on Tuesday for the first voter decision on abortion since the U.S. Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood v. Casey in June. The pro-life Value Them Both amendment sought to void a Kansas Supreme Court decision that found a fundamental right to abortion in the state constitution in 2019. Election observers had thought that the vote would be close, but in a stunning surprise for both sides, it wasn't. Voter turnout was unexpectedly large. Nearly half the electorate cast a ballot. The no votes to keep the interpretation of the Constitution and its so-called right to an abortion came in at almost 60%. And the yes votes, which would have allowed lawmakers to pass legislation that could put limits on abortion, fell short at 41%. What happened? Reporter Alan Holdren takes us to Kansas for Election Day.
We're not going anywhere, and we're more resolved than ever.
The reaction as the Value Them Both coalition received the news that Kansans had voted pro-abortion on August the 2nd.
The abortion industry came in with 71% of its funding from out of state, and they were able to sow a lie that the passage of the Value Them Both amendment would somehow harm women, and in some cases they said that actually that women would die because of its passage. And ultimately that's why we were not successful this evening.
The no vote won by a total of 59% to 41%. By all accounts, this was an important vote, putting Kansas at the center of national attention for pro-life and pro-abortion advocacy groups. Yes Vote advocates led a summer-long grassroots outreach campaign, knocking on doors and making phone calls to rouse people out to vote. Much of the nearly $6 million of Yes campaign funds came from the state's 4 Catholic dioceses and the Susan B. Anthony list.
Through the noise.
No vote proponents financed a media push, including commercials that blasted the pro-life position. Kansas media reported the $6.5 million in contributions to the No campaign came largely from out of state, Planned Parenthood prominent among them. The city of Overland Park, a suburb of Kansas City on the eastern edge of the state, was at the eye of the storm. Overland Park is in Johnson County, the wealthiest and most populous of all the counties in Kansas. It's also deeply divided over pro-life and pro-abortion positions. It's also the home to this Catholic church, the Church of the Ascension, which was vandalized after Roe v. Wade was overturned. These people were very passionate about this amendment vote. Voters like those here at the polling station at Overland Park's Arts and Heritage Museum.
I think that women in this state deserve to make this choice for themselves and that nothing needs to change, and voting yes would change things potentially in the future, and I don't think that needs to happen.
I believe that life begins at conception, and I do believe that this amendment is going to kill a lot of babies if it passes by people voting no.
Voting no gives them the chance to take care of themselves and their own body, and I just support women in that choice.
I also voted no. Her body, her choice.
Yeah.
It's pro-choice till I die, truly.
Till I die.
Yeah.
I feel very strongly that the Supreme Court did the right thing in forcing the states to make this decision, because it's a very personal decision.
Women should be afforded the choice to, make medical decisions for themselves and not, have to involve the state or, religion or religious groups or anybody really. I mean, it's a personal decision, so I voted no.
I voted yes on the amendment because I think basically the right to life is at stake.
Voter turnout was way up for an August primary. The Kansas Secretary of State reported nearly 50% of Kansas voters voted. Traditionally, August votes in Kansas average just half that. Inside Overland Park's Furella Event Center, proponents of the yes vote gathered for this watch party. Initially a festive atmosphere Tuesday evening as the votes rolled in. Many of these people spent the last weeks, months, and even years preparing for this. There was hope that the yes vote would take the day.
Whatever happens here tonight, hopefully it's going to be an encouragement or a testament to the rest of the country. The exciting thing is that women are going to be protected from an industry that sometimes doesn't care much about them.
This is probably the most important vote that Kansans will cast. Kansans, certainly of this generation, will cast in our lifetime.
Last year we had just under 8,000 abortions performed in our state, and more than half of them were on women that came from out of state. So we do not want Kansas to become that destination abortion state.
But as the night went on, the numbers settled in and the no vote won out, a distressing outcome for those present. It wasn't just a sense of the loss of a vote, but of the loss of lives because of it.
One by one, the people of Kansas will see all of those pro-life laws being overturned. And we know that's dangerous to women and it's dangerous to children.
It'll show, again, as time has shown, that the abortion industry will say and do whatever it takes to win. And so other states need to be prepared for the amount of lies and really the fact that the mainstream media will not hold them accountable whatsoever. So I think that there's some good lessons to learn from what's happened here in Kansas, but ultimately truth will prevail and the pro-life movement will be successful, and other states certainly should continue down the path of ensuring that they can have abortion limits.
In Overland Park, Kansas, Alan Holdren, EWTN News In Depth.
The Susan B. Anthony Pro-Life America organization works to end abortion through direct lobbying and grassroots campaigns. It released a statement after the vote came in saying, "The loss is a huge disappointment for pro-life Kansans." The statement continues, "It's critical that pro-life candidates go on offense to expose the extremism of Democrats' policy goals for nationalized abortion on demand, paid for by taxpayers." Kansas bishops also issued a statement writing, "We're sorry to see that the most vulnerable human being in our society, the unborn child, will not be protected but further treated with indifference and injustice. Despite the outcome, the church will continue to help mothers in crisis pregnancy situations." Thousands of Catholics and other pro-life partners worked for more than a year on this campaign. On this program, we've talked to several volunteers who went door to door to rally the vote. One of the leaders of the campaign joins us now. Chuck Weber is Executive Director of the Kansas Catholic Conference. Chuck, thank you so much for being with us. I'm so sorry that it's on the coming out of such terrible news. We know this result was a big disappointment, but we've had a couple of days to analyze what happened and looking to the future. What lessons should the pro-life movement learn from what happened in Kansas?
Right. Thank you for having me today. I think one of the things that, and my colleague Peter Northcott alluded to this, that if you're dealing with the abortion industry whose mission is killing babies, nothing is off the table in terms of tactics, in terms of rhetoric, in terms of messaging. So you have to be ready for just outright blatant lies. And more than that, you have to be prepared for a media that is not doing their job, that they are also pro-abortion by default, and they're going to not only not challenge the abortion industry message, but they're going to serve as an echo chamber for their messaging.
And that's definitely what happened there. It felt like in the package we saw that you were outgunned. Has the choice then, the technical choice of the development of the wording being discussed? Because I know that there was some questions placed about a yes question instead of a no question. Was that decision significant in this vote?
Oh, I don't think so. I mean, we looked at this really hard with not only attorneys, but other people, going back almost 3 years, actually. And it would have been very difficult for us to get, no is the default button for anyone who is confused. And that's what the abortion industry did. They created some confusion out there. And so I don't think there was really any practical way for us to do a no vote that would have helped us.
And do you think then the timing of the Supreme Court's decision on Dobbs made that worse and actually hurt your efforts, bringing so much attention this summer to abortion and messaging from pro-abortion advocates?
Yeah, it did. I mean, I don't think there's any doubt. And I don't think any of us even here today, we're just 6 weeks out from, the ground moving under our feet. The aftershocks are still happening regarding the Dobbs decision. There are people my age who never thought that Roe would be overturned. And so 6 weeks ago, many of the people on our side of this question, pro-life people, said, well, job is done, a mission accomplished, when we were just trying to tell them, look, we have to re-energize our efforts because the abortion industry is going to come at us really hard. And they did. And again, they just had no boundaries of truthfulness or anything resembling the facts regarding this amendment. So yes, the Dobbs decision was big. And then you couple that with the energy from the other side and the complicity of the secular media. And it was always going to be a very tough hill for us. We always thought we might win, 51, 52, 53%, but then you added in all these other factors and the mountain just became too high for us to climb.
Well, it was an important moment and one that I think you mentioned something critical, which is the literacy. Do we actually understand what Roe did and Casey did? Do we know what the Dobbs decision actually does so that people can come with an informed understanding and do something with that information? More information coming out of Kansas that we heard in the package you just saw. A large number of women who receive abortions in Kansas already come from out of state. Right. With so many states around Kansas now limiting or banning abortion outright, do you anticipate a large uptick in demand for abortion services in your state?
Yeah, we do. And not only, this isn't just Chuck Weber or the Kansas Bishops or the Value Them Both Coalition, but the Guttmacher Institute, which is the research arm for Planned Parenthood, they just unabashedly said before this happened that if Roe is overturned and if Value Them Both did not pass, there would be a 1,000+% increase in abortions in Kansas. So this came from the Guttmacher Institute. This was not from our side. So we're bracing ourselves right now for a big influx of women and girls coming into Kansas to get abortions. The abortion industry has already indicated that they're looking to, satiate this demand by setting up more clinics, both in Western Kansas and in the Kansas City area. There's a new abortion clinic. So this is a 5-alarm fire in Kansas right now because the Midwest is now going to be looking to Kansas as an abortion destination. And that is a horrifying prospect for someone like me who loves the state of Kansas and knows that at their core, the people here are pro-life.
And Chuck, then what does bracing yourselves look like? I know that you just are coming out of this decision, but what is the Catholic Church's role in this situation? What kind of support will be available to women to help them choose life?
Yeah, so many of your viewers are aware of this initiative called Walking with Moms in Need, and Archbishop Joseph Naumann from Kansas City in Kansas has been a leader in that movement. So we need to get better on the parish level about telling these young girls and these women who are in these unplanned pregnancies, look, life is a beautiful choice. We're going to help you not only bring your baby into the world, but we're going to help you with everything else in your, whether that's setting up your apartment with some furniture, getting your utilities, getting a job resume, that sort of thing. So we need to walk with moms in need. The other thing that I did is I sent out a note just a day and a half ago to my Knights of Columbus and said, you guys are fantastic. You've put ultrasound machines in pregnancy resource centers all around Kansas. We're going to need some more of those pregnancy resource centers to get ultrasound machines, because we know that that is a very effective tool when a girl or a woman sees that baby within her through the ultrasound. Many times she's going to change her decision on abortion. So those are, I think, two practical things that we need to employ right now, again, to try and address this 5-alarm fire that's going to be raging in Kansas any day.
And practical things in addition to prayer are what it's about. Thank you so much, Chuck, and take heart.
Yep, thank you.
A day after the Kansas vote, President Joe Biden said he believed the decisive no vote was the direct result of outrage at the Supreme Court's repeal of Roe. He made the remarks as he signed an executive order on abortion access, making it easier for women to cross state lines to get the procedure. That was but one of several efforts at the federal level to fight back against tightening abortion restrictions in the states. In the first major action by the Justice Department challenging a state trigger law, the department sued the state of Idaho over its law banning abortion after 6 weeks. Attorney General Merrick Garland said it violates federal law requiring health providers perform medically necessary abortions to protect a woman's health.
Although the Idaho law provides an exception to prevent the death of a pregnant woman, it includes no exception for cases in which the abortion is necessary to prevent serious jeopardy to the woman's health. Moreover, it would subject doctors to arrest and criminal prosecution even if they performed an abortion to save a woman's life.
In another move to codify abortion on the federal level, the Biden administration is seeking to change Trump-era anti-discrimination rules in the Affordable Care Act to include language to protect access to abortion. The proposed rules of Section 1557 states that hospitals and doctors receiving federal funding would have to provide abortion services by adding pregnancy termination to existing sexual discrimination rules. Other revisions to Section 1557 include gender identity language, which experts say would force doctors to perform gender transition procedures. Recipients of federal funds who refuse to comply risk being charged with discrimination and face massive financial penalties. Rachel Morrison with the Ethics and Public Policy Center says it's a violation of religious freedom.
The Biden administration wants to say that termination of pregnancy, aka abortion, is sex discrimination. This could force doctors to perform abortions or insurance providers to have to cover abortions. And religious and other folk who have pro-life views and objections to abortion to be complicit in that process through their insurance plans.
The United States Conference of Catholic Bishops condemned the proposed changes, stating that they threaten our ability to carry out our healing ministries and others to practice medicine. The conference also called on HHS to disavow any intent to force healthcare workers to perform abortions against their will. We'll hear again from Rachel Morrison from the Ethics and Public Policy Center a little later on in this program. There's much more ahead, from the Pope's trip to Canada to honoring the elderly to understanding and accepting those with autism. EWTN News In Depth. We'll be right back.
You have come as a pilgrim, seeking to walk together with us on the pathway of truth, justice, healing, reconciliation, and hope.
A papal pilgrimage of reconciliation with the Indigenous peoples of Canada. The pontiff apologizes to the generations who suffered the trauma of forced assimilation in abusive residential schools. We've just celebrated the second annual World Day for Grandparents and the Elderly, why Pope Francis says members of the older generation are so critically important to our Catholic life.
I really felt kind of called to present the way we as autistics pray for my fellow autistics and for those who are close to us.
And later, an autistic priest explains the struggle for acceptance among autistic Catholics. We explore his mission to enhance understanding and inclusiveness.
You have traveled a long way to be with us on our land and to walk with us on the path of reconciliation. For this, we honor you and extend to you our most heartfelt welcome. It is a blessing to receive and host you among us.
A historic meeting. Pope Francis extends an olive branch, asking for forgiveness for the past sins of the Church against the Indigenous peoples of Canada. Welcome back to EWTN News In Depth. The week-long visit stirred feelings of heartache and injustice, calls for change and prayers of hope for the future of Indigenous Catholics. Colin Flynn has our report from Canada.
Pope Francis called it a penitential pilgrimage. The 85-year-old Pope crisscrossed Canada's vast landmass to meet the country's Indigenous communities and hear their stories. Edmonton in the west was the first stop on this historic papal trip, where the Pope travelled south of the city to the community of Masswitches. At the site of a former residential school, there the Pope had a silent moment of prayer. In front of a large crowd, Pope Francis delivered his much-anticipated apology, one he had previously issued at the Vatican, but now this was on Canadian soil. Among the crowd was Karen Wildcat, an Indigenous woman who herself was at a residential school with her two brothers. She's hoping the apology will help her people.
For a lot of healing, a lot of reconciliation. My concern is that the hurt and the anger is going to keep being passed on to our children.
You think that there is no good that can come from it being passed on from generation to generation? To
be able to accept it and move on, that is my hope.
I am telling you once more that I am deeply sorry, Pope Francis told the people, an apology he would repeat a number of times on this visit. In response, the Indigenous elders and chiefs presented the Pope with Indigenous headgear, a mark of respect. At the Sacred Heart Church in Edmonton, which is the only church in all of Canada solely dedicated to the Indigenous community, the elder is Fernie Marty. The idea was that they wanted to take away your culture, your traditions, the way you had practiced your traditions.
We were paganistic in our ways of believing and the ways we follow as Indigenous peoples. We were punished for speaking our languages. The favorite word for us back in the school days was les sauvages.
Les sauvages, what does that mean?
Savages. Savages. That's what they referred to us.
Inside the Sacred Heart Church, Pope Francis reiterated his shame and sorrow at the hurt caused by Catholics during the era of Canada's residential school system. The Pope again met with the Indigenous people, including Elder Fernie Marty and his wife.
That to me, tremendous gift for my own personal healing journey to continue on. You know, that's how I see it.
Pope Francis's visit to Edmonton was hugely symbolic for the Indigenous people, especially when he visited their sacred Catholic site of Lac Saint-Anne. There, the large, shallow and muddy lake has been revered as a place of spiritual significance and of healing for centuries. In his wheelchair, the Pope prayed by the lake before blessing a bowl of the lake's water. An estimated 50,000 people then attended Mass, celebrated by the Pope, at the Commonwealth Stadium in Edmonton, Canada's largest stadium. The Pope reflected on the elderly, who he said should be honoured, who serve an example to the Church on how to pass on the faith in a loving way. Concelebrating the Mass with Pope Francis was Archbishop Richard Smith, the national coordinator for the entire papal trip in Canada.
Many good things were done. We can't forget that. Many, many good things were done. The early missionaries that came here to Western Canada, for example, they immersed themselves in the lives of the Indigenous peoples. They understood the beauty of the culture, they understood the importance of linguistic preservation, they created dictionaries. So a lot of great good took place, and we can't forget that. We can't allow it either, though, to whitewash some mistakes that were made.
After Edmonton, the Pope travelled east where he touched down in Quebec City. There he met with Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and other state officials. And at the Cathedral of Notre Dame, the Pope took part in evening prayer, talking about the importance of Christian joy, telling people when seas are rough, the storm is always on the surface, but the depths remain calm and peaceful. On the Pope's final day, he travelled to Canada's northmost and most sparsely populated territory of Nunavut. There he met Indigenous people and again apologised once more. In front of a group of young people, he told them to always choose light over darkness and never to be disheartened, but to seek out what is good. Jesus never points his finger at you, he told them. He embraces you and encourages you because he believes in you, even at those times when you stop believing in yourself. So never lose hope, fight, give it your all, and you will not be sorry. The Pope then returned to the Vatican in Rome. Colin Flynn for EWTN News In Depth.
Father Raymond D'Souza has written extensively on the Church's history with Indigenous tribes of the Americas, and he provided coverage of this historic trip for EWTN in Canada. He joins us now to give us more context for the Pope's visit. Father D'Souza, thank you so much for being with us. You wrote in the National Catholic Register about the division among Catholics on how much is enough and when will this be over? Two phrases that you put together related to the papal apology and restoration for Indigenous communities. Is this dynamic surprising? What did you mean by that?
Well, I think that in Canada, this issue has been for 30 years now, more or less a prominent issue, and the last year, a very prominent and conflicted issue. So a lot of people brought to this visit of the Holy Father some suspicions, some even resentments, and also goodwill on the part of many. I mean, there was a mixture of things. I think that there were some voices who thought, well, should this be done? There were apologies offered before. We're tired of it, that kind of thing. And both the bishops of Canada and the Holy Father thought this would be a necessary thing. It can be a humbling thing to ask forgiveness, but they both were keen, that is the bishops and the Holy Father, to say that this is part of traditional Catholic practice, and especially St. John Paul emphasized it as part of the Great Jubilee. And in a certain sense, the gospel encourages not to put a limit on the grace of forgiveness and the grace of mercy. And that's really what the Holy Father wanted to emphasize. And I think he addressed those concerns from people who were a little frustrated, perhaps, or suspicious. If they took time to listen carefully to what he said, I think they would have been satisfied.
And he had some really important insights, as you said, that bring together the three pontificates that have dealt with this, apologized for it, and done their best to be pastoral, but also to bring us home on this issue. Tell us about then the impact of that moment of silence at the graves in Alberta.
So the site that he went to visit, first of all, on that Monday morning, his first official visit, was to a place where 4 Indigenous tribes they come together in that place. And the cemetery there it's the common cemetery of that place. There was a residential school, Indian boarding school, on that site. It's long been torn down. And so it's likely that some of the children who went to the school due to negligence perhaps, or even just simple disease and lack of good hygiene, and say 100 years ago, may have died, would have been buried there. So there was in 2021 a massive international controversy about supposed grave sites. Sometimes people misreported it as being mass graves or massacres. That never happened. And the Indigenous peoples of Canada never said it happened, but there was a lot of confusion about that. And so visiting a grave site was a healing gesture. To pray for the dead is always a good thing, but to pray for the dead in that place would have included, in a powerful visual symbol, those children who did go to the schools, and because they died of tuberculosis and weren't returned home, or because they maybe even died of lack of sanitation or nutrition because the schools, which were funded by the government, were underfunded. Praying for them, or praying for all the dead in that place, included them, and I think that was very important.
And this is a really important point that the Holy Father tried to hammer home, the relationship between the church and the state. I know that he talked about something called ideological colonization and the dangers of ideological colonization. It's a very, very important term that he coined. What did he mean by that? Can you explain that to us?
When the church gets too close to the state, sometimes abuses can creep in.
That's
not
right.
not just in abuses of individuals, but in cooperating with systems that can be, as he said, deplorable. So he held up here, for example, the model of St. Francois de Laval, Canada's first bishop, who was courageous enough to speak against, in his case, the French colonial authorities in defense of the indigenous peoples. Many people were not courageous enough to do that. So it's a mixed record. And he came specifically to ask forgiveness for the dark parts, the shadows of that.
Right.
Having condemned that is the participation in colonial excesses, he said, look, let's not think of ourselves as this is only part of the past. He said, there's a same or similar colonial mentality today where rich countries, and this would include very much Canada's federal government and the United States federal government, look at poor people across the world. And although they don't wish to go and conquer their countries and make them colonies anymore, they may, as a condition, for example, of foreign aid or as a condition of security guarantees, force those countries to adopt, in a certain kind of odd sort of evangelization, the, say, secular liberal preferences.
Secular ideology.
Of the government of Canada or the government of the United States. So he said, if you want to condemn the excesses and abuses of the colonial mentality of the 18th century and 19th century, fine, but don't think that you're immune from that. And today, in the 21st century, there's this same process going on, and he calls it ideological colonization.
Really quickly, Father D'Souza, Canada's Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, a Catholic at odds with church teaching on many levels, took a bold step during the papal visit, and he told Pope Francis that the church was not doing enough for the Indigenous community. What is his motive in catching the Pope out?
Well, he didn't say it directly to the Pope, at least maybe privately, but publicly he made those comments. Our Prime Minister, I think it's fair to say, likes to be at the center of attention, even in his speech saying that the former residential school students should be the center of attention. He talked about where he was and where he had gone and so forth. So he finds it a bit hard, I think, to not be at the center of attention. And we have to be honest, the policy of residential schools was a government policy, government implemented. The religious orders, Catholic and otherwise, Anglican, Protestant, did run the schools, but it was a government policy from start to finish. And to a certain degree, I think the government of Canada finds it easier on such occasions to point the finger at others as a way of distracting attention from its own role. So I think that's probably what was going on there. I should say that the Prime Minister was, I think, less than gracious on some occasions, but our Governor General, who represents the Queen, and many other of the Indigenous leaders, not unanimously, but gave the Holy Father a very warm welcome. So we shouldn't let the Prime Minister's deportment stand in for everybody.
Thank you so much, Father D'Souza.
Thank you. God bless you.
We'll be right back.
Staying true to morals and values and what's right and wrong, and then telling them stories of our ancestors, where we came from.
As the Pope said in Canada, honor the elderly, for it is they who pass on the faith. Reflections on that next. In old age, they will still bear fruit. Psalms 92:15. This was the opening quote our Holy Father used in this year's message for the Second World Day for grandparents and the elderly. Mark Irons explains the work Pope Francis is calling our seniors to do and their important role in the church in this Catholic life.
They need to set the example.
Some spiritual wisdom for grandparents from a Catholic grandmother herself. Kathy Bigelow says seniors have an important role in society, nurturing the next generation.
When the kids have questions, they can ask you.
Bigelow has 16 grandchildren. She sees herself as a guide for them.
Staying true to morals and values and what's right and wrong, and then telling them stories of our ancestors, where we came from. And kids need to feel a sense of connection.
Looking back to his own childhood, Divine Fomunium says his grandparents were the key connection to his spiritual formation.
My grandparents particularly are the reason why I am Catholic.
He learned about the sacraments and the rosary from his grandfather. But faith was more than a lesson. He saw his grandfather live it.
Living out your faith is itself a way to demonstrate that God is real, the church is real. If you are going to teach the faith, you better live it first. That's the only way I would tell grandparents to live out their faith.
And if his grandfather were alive today, Fomunium says he would tell him, well done. On the global scale, the church now has a time to give special thanks to grandparents. Last month, Catholics around the world celebrated the second annual World Day for Grandparents and the Elderly. Throughout his papacy, Pope Francis has reaffirmed the dignity of the elderly and called them on mission, once saying, "Old age is a time of grace in which the Lord renews his call to us. He calls us to safeguard and transmit the faith. He calls us to pray, especially to intercede. He calls us to be close to those in need." With such a crucial role in the life of the church, the elderly need spiritual reinforcement.
As Catholics, we pray for the intercession of saints, holy men and women who can be spiritual guides. And for grandparents, St. Anne is a great example.
St. Anne, along with her husband, St. Joachim, were the grandparents of Jesus. In her own prayer, Kathy Bigelow says she looks to St. Anne and relies on St. Anne's daughter.
The Blessed Mother is my absolute favorite. Absolute favorite.
Considering the central role of Mary in the life of Christ, St. Pope John Paul II once shared this reflection. Let us think then that it was St. Anne herself who was the first to teach Mary, her daughter, how to be a mother. For Bigelow, teaching her grandchildren includes leading them in prayer whenever they come visit.
I ask them who they want to pray for. Sometimes it's a dog, sometimes it's a kid down the street. But I want them to know that they can pray for people.
It's one small example of faith, but a type of witness that can have a lasting impact on others. Just take it from a fully grown grandchild.
When they grow up and begin to grapple with life, they'll be able to hold on to that truth, that if grandma could do this, if granddad could do this, then I can do it.
Mark Irons, EWTN News in Depth.
If you're looking for a gift for an important senior in your life, Forget-Me-Not flowers are the official flowers for grandparents. And if you're looking for resources on how to pass on the faith to your grandchildren or build a stronger senior Catholic community, check out the Catholic Grandparents Association. It's a great place to find pilgrimages, podcasts, ministry guides, newsletters, and more. The Weekend Review is next. America finally locates the most wanted terrorists in the world, the Catholic Latino vote. Our guest analyst joins me for a deep dive on its impact and the Respect for Marriage Act. That's all ahead. Stay right there. The most wanted terrorist in the world is now dead. That story tops the Week in Review. Ayman al-Zawahiri, the man who helped plan the 9/11 terror attacks, died in a U.S. drone strike. The 71-year-old al-Qaeda leader was at one time Osama bin Laden's personal physician. He rose to the top of the terrorist organization after U.S. forces killed bin Laden in 2011. Al-Zawahiri was on the balcony of a house in Kabul, Afghanistan, when a Hellfire missile drone strike killed him early Sunday morning. The operation was conducted by the CIA. U.S. officials say the Taliban was aware of Zawahiri's presence and tried to conceal it. The White House says no civilians were injured in the attack. Missiles flying off the coast of Taiwan from Chinese military exercises, a show of force after House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's controversial visit to the island. Pelosi says she made the trip to send an unequivocal message that America stands with Taiwan. China's leadership, which used high-level diplomatic pressure to try to stop the trip, expressed anger, while many American officials support Pelosi's visit.
The U.S. government should have strictly restrained the attempts of its number 3 figure to visit Taiwan, but instead it has given free rein to it. This is the root cause for the current tensions in the Taiwan Strait.
We cannot have China determine who can and cannot visit Taiwan, when someone can or cannot go to Taiwan. The day that that happens is the day that Taiwan is isolated, and it's game over.
China announced it's halting dialogue with the U.S. on issues including military relations and climate change, and imposed sanctions against Pelosi, a longtime critic of their Communist Party. A bill enhancing health care and disability benefits for millions of veterans exposed to toxic burn pits is headed to President Biden's desk. The bill won final approval in the Senate on Tuesday after it faced a setback when it required a technical fix in June, and then got derailed when Republicans wanted another change. Veterans and their advocates demonstrated on Capitol Hill for days, pushing for its passage. The Senate approval was celebrated outside of Congress.
I've never seen so many veterans with tears in their eyes and tears in their eyes of joy than I've seen in the last hour.
President Biden described the legislation as the biggest expansion of benefits for service-connected health issues in 30 years and the largest single bill ever to address exposure to burn pits. The president is expected to sign the bill next week. Last month, the House of Representatives passed a bill that would protect same-sex unions and interracial marriages. The Respect for Marriage Act comes as a response to growing concerns that the recent overturn of Roe v. Wade could put other high court rulings in jeopardy. But many Republicans believe the Supreme Court has no intention of reversing these rulings, making the bill pointless. We spoke earlier with Rachel Morrison of the Ethics and Public Policy Center. She also weighed in on how this bill could hurt religious freedom.
This bill is about legally stigmatizing those who have, according to Obergefell, good and decent views about marriage being between one man and one woman. It would open the door for the federal government to remove tax-exempt status from religious nonprofits who do not agree with an expanded definition of marriage.
The Respect for Marriage Act now moves to an evenly split Senate, where it's expected to stall. The future of same-sex marriage, abortion access, the economy and inflation, and immigration are but a few hot-button issues politicians running in the fall general election will have to face. How will Catholic voters impact the results? Specifically, how will the fastest-growing Catholic demographic in America, the Hispanic Catholic voter, influence this election? EWTN News recently teamed up with Real Clear Opinion Research to poll Catholic voters. To discuss that all-important Latino Catholic vote, we're joined by journalist J.D. Long Garcia, who has written extensively about this topic. J.D., it's great to have you here with us. The EWTN and Real Clear poll showed that Latino Catholics are not a political monolith, with 54% identifying as Democrat, 21% as Republicans, and 24% as independent. How different are they from non-Latino voters?
That's a great question. It's interesting in terms of the Latino vote today, not only immediately after the Dobbs decision, but also coming out of the pandemic. Latino voters are people that are very connected to their community and very connected to their family. So what informs Latino voters has a lot to do with that face-to-face contact that a lot of people have day to day.
I think that we'll get to the abortion issue in a second because I know you wrote about that, but let's talk about immigration. Our poll showed Catholic Latino voters heavily supported a legal path to coming to the U.S., but they also showed significant support for border security. This is an issue that divides the American church. Are these results surprising to you?
I don't find them surprising. As you mentioned at the beginning, Latino voters are not a monolith. And most Latinos in the United States were born here. So they're going to have different sensibilities, perhaps, than those that are coming here, that come to this country from another one, like myself. And so I think that's very understandable to be hearing that. And also with the reports that we've been seeing from the border and the kind of the lack of security that's been reported, it's not surprising to see that a lot of Latino voters are paying attention to that.
Right, security is an important issue for them. You focused then on Latino Catholics and abortion last week in an article you wrote using information from yet another poll. What did you find out about their thoughts on the defense of life?
It's interesting about that poll in particular because from what I understand, the EWTN poll was taken before Dobbs. This poll was taken in the days immediately following the Dobbs decision, where we kind of have this media frenzy going on about abortion. And what that poll found was that 75% of Hispanic Latinos are in favor of access to abortion. I found that very surprising myself. So then when you dig a little bit deeper into the numbers, you find that out of the 2,000 people that were surveyed, only about 104, I think it was, of the people who responded identified as Hispanic Latinos. That's a very small number. And so there's question about whether or not there has been a shift. The people that I interviewed for the story do think that there has been some kind of a shift, but not that severe, that it hasn't been from, in 2010, it was around 50% of Latinos supported access to abortion. And now up to 75, it seems like a huge jump. In fact, the same research institute, the Public Religion Research Institute, in 2019 found that most Hispanic Catholics were against abortion. So it does seem to be this number seems to be fluctuating a bit. But in terms of what's the reaction to Dobbs, that's informing a lot of of these numbers. The way that the media has covered it, I think, has a lot to do with it. The other thing that I discovered in speaking to people is that in certain Latino communities, again, not a monolith, there's different communities in different parts of the country, but in California, for example, there's the Republicans have kind of a bad reputation in the Latino community. There is also kind of this, if you put like a Trump sticker on something, people won't like it. A certain group of people won't pay attention to it. And so with the Dobbs decision and the credit that's been given or blame in some cases that's been placed on President Trump, that's dissuaded some people from the issue. So there is that kind of
political
guilt
tinge.
by reputation.
Yeah,
that's right. It kind of shifts it a little bit. So it's early. I've been a pro-life person for decades, and I never expected Roe to be overturned, and I'm still kind of in shock that it actually happened. So I think that we're still in the process of discerning that, and I think people's minds are still changing right now about that. And that's what I've been hearing a lot from the people that I've been speaking to.
Right. The impact of that is going to slowly roll out and people will change their minds and change their minds again, hopefully looking toward defending life. In the EWTN Real Clear Politics poll, Latinos and non-Latinos poll similarly on familiarity and acceptance of church teaching, but Latinos are less likely to believe in the real presence in the Eucharist. Any idea why?
I found that very surprising. The Latinos, one of the things that we talk about different images of Jesus, perhaps in our faith lives, and the crucified Jesus, the Good Friday, the Lord on the cross. That's very much a part of many Latino traditions and cultures, and that's something that's very, very important to us. So then to hear that at the same time that belief in the real presence has gone down. That's very difficult to believe. So I not to question the poll entirely, but I think that it does point to, just like the polls about abortion and other issues that are important for us as Catholics, they point to a need to do more evangelization and more catechesis.
That's right.
And I think that the bishops recognize that, and that's part of this Eucharistic revival that we're in the middle of today.
Yes, we covered the National Eucharistic Revival extensively 2 weeks ago, and I know that we'll continue to do that as that 3-year process unfolds, and hopefully they'll take Latinos as part of that, knowing whether this poll is true or not, that they need that catechesis as well. Last question, our polling suggests that Latinos are less tied to church teaching on same-sex marriage, and that their white and black counterparts do have stronger beliefs on traditional marriage. Why this change? Latinos are often associated with countries that have not yet legalized same-sex marriage. I know that seems to trickle down through the continent.
Yeah, it's not an easy answer, but I think a lot of it has to do with our relationship with our families. I think that because we're so so familial in the way that we express our faith and the way that we live our lives. You know, we like to hang out with our parents and stuff.
Right.
Unlike some of our Anglo counterparts, we like tías y tíos y abuelos and everybody, right?
That's right.
And I think, you know, and so I think that you know, when you look at it and you think, and you know somebody that's in your family that is from that community, then you're going to see things a little bit differently, and you're going to want to be welcoming to that person in your family.
A very pastoral focused, community focused response.
That's right. Yeah, I think that's true.
Well, thank you so much, JD. I'm so grateful for your analysis and for your reporting.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Next, a faith journey centered on overcoming a developmental disability.
We had their first communion in a small log chapel on Notre Dame's campus with 2 priests who are family friends. And it was perfect and lovely, and it was wonderful.
Welcoming people with autism into the church with open arms. One mother's story, and the Catholic priest who's made autism acceptance his mission. We'll be right back. We close today with a very unique faith journey. Father Matthew Schneider was diagnosed with autism after running into a few difficulties during his first priestly assignment. Instead of letting a diagnosis defeat him, he has become one of the few publicly autistic priests in America. His mission now, to help others on the spectrum grow in their faith. Reporter Rizal Reyes shares his faith journey in depth.
My name is Father Matthew Schneider, LC for Legions of Christ.
Growing up, Father Matthew always knew he was special. He would read the same books over and over, do math in his head when he saw numbers, and notice patterns in everyday objects. In school, he would get above average grades and rarely got in trouble. But he struggled in other areas, like socializing with peers, which often led to being teased.
I think that it's just little things in how in communication a lot of times, or in misunderstanding people's social cues.
Even though Father Matthew says he exhibited signs of autism growing up, the criteria used to determine if a person has autism was different in the 1980s. His life changed when he was assigned as a chaplain and youth minister at a school. After working for a year, he was devastated when they didn't want him back. Someone suggested Asperger's, a type of high-functioning autism. After extensive testing, he received a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder in January 2016 at the age of 34.
Initially, I felt kind of pretty bad, actually. I just felt like everything was just a disaster in that sense. I felt like this is going to be a failure as a priest, and I really wasn't feeling good.
Then, as he read about autism, Father Matthew began to accept this new reality.
I'm autistic.
On World Autism Awareness Day, April 2nd, 2019, Father Matthew decided to go public with his diagnosis by posting a video on YouTube with his story.
And I need to write about this to help other people who are also on the spectrum, you know, and other people who encounter others, so that both for, you know, the parish community and for the individual there, that they can really live that life, that Christian life.
That's when Father Matthew started putting pen to paper on his book, God Loves the Autistic Mind, prayer guide for those on the spectrum and those who love us. Father Matthew recently completed his doctoral thesis in moral theology at the Divine Mercy University, where he also served as assistant chaplain.
For him, he's just a great example for our students, for everyone here, someone who has the struggle with autism, but yet accepts it in such a beautiful way with a great spirit of faith and simplicity and humility.
Jesus loves you just the way you are is a common refrain used in CCD or religious education classes. However, Father Matthew explains that for those with autism, it can be hard to feel that Jesus loves them because they often feel like outsiders in social groups, including church.
Father Matthew says one of the steps a church can take to become more inclusive is to offer sensory-friendly Mass in every city.
Father Matthew keeps an updated map of all sensory-friendly Masses offered nationwide on his website.
A sensory-friendly Mass would be a Mass that would turn down the lights, turn down the volume, avoid incense, and things like that, so that autistics don't feel overwhelmed by the sensory experience of Mass.
This and other content he publishes are intended to help people like Lee Sneed, mother of twin 11-year-old boys Bruno and Carlo, who are both autistic. Sneed explains that when her boys were younger, it was a struggle to attend Mass. Despite the obstacles, she has found ways to keep the Catholic faith a constant in their lives.
They love St. Michael the Archangel. He's probably like the thing that holds their attention the most. At Mass, they're relatively quiet. I'm working with them to participate more fully, like to always kneel and always stand when the rest of us do.
Along with attending weekly Mass, the Sneed family incorporates prayers in their bedtime routine. After adaptive faith formation classes, both Bruno and Carlo received their first Holy Communion in 2020. Their mother hopes that in the future, her sons will further integrate into the church community and be accepted for who they are.
So when you have these two identical, tall for their age kids acting 3 years younger than they are, it's a little unsettling to people. But they're best friends. I mean, they love each other so much. They're fierce defenders of each other.
Both Sneed and Father Matthew agree that for greater acceptance, people with disabilities should be seen performing everyday roles, including roles in the church. He sends a hopeful message to others like him who are on the spectrum.
I really invite you to learn how to pray as you are, learn to come to God as an autistic person, and learn to really accept God's love in your own life.
Rosal Regis, EWTN News in Depth.
A wonderful story and witness of adversity and helping others fight through it, making our faith that much stronger. That does it for this edition of EWTN News in Depth. I'm Montse Alvarado. We hope to see you again same time next week as we share with you the news of the week and stories important to your Catholic life. See you then.